from ToolsQA.com. I welcome you to the class on frameworks. This is the very first class, and I hope before joining in this class you have gone through your Java tutorials and you have gone through your TestNG tutorials and you are fairly comfortable with both Java and TestNG. The reason I'm saying this is because if you're not yet comfortable writing a good length programs in Java, and if you're not comfortable writing TestNG tests on yourself, then the frameworks is of no use. These classes won't make any sense for you, and it would require a lot of lot of going back and forth in previous sessions to understand the basics described here. So with this prerequisite, let me start the session and let us try to understand what we will be discussing in the very first class on frameworks. Alright, so let us quickly walk through the agenda today. The agenda starts with a definition of framework. Then it moves on to architecture of the framework, and then it starts to describe individual pieces of frameworks for a framework. For example, test runner, which is the component which will run your tests. Then there would be a run data provider, which would be the component of your framework which will provide you the test run information. For example, what the run is all about, what are the URLs to use in the test run, what kind of test data or what kind of tests we need to pick, and it will also decide where the common framework configurations are present. For example, where is the Internet Explorer driver on the machine, and what are the basic timeouts that you want to apply on your framework test run, right? So these are the things which will go inside the run data provider. Then we will move on to tests component, which will be your tests, individual tests which you will write, how they can be arranged and grouped together to fit inside your framework. And then we will talk about the test data provider component, which is the component which will provide test data for your tests. And then at the end we will talk about a reporter component. Now reporter component will be responsible for writing all your logs, right, and creating a consolidated report at the end. So we can divide reporter component into logger and a reporter, but for the sake of the agenda I have just written only one component. After that we will talk about the project scenario that we will be taking into consideration before designing our framework. So it's very important that you understand the requirement of your project before even starting to write framework. It is very important to understand what kind of tests you will run, what kind of application do you have, and the framework shapes itself according to the needs. So it's if someone says that there is only one type of framework, then that's not true. Framework has a wide variations in the different versions that are present across different companies, and the variations are because each project has different needs, right? So based on the needs, we can design whatever framework we want to design. And to understand the needs, we have to understand the project scenario, an overview of the whole project. So we will talk about what project we will work on and how we will find out different requirements of the project. Now after that I will list down a set of broad level scenarios that we will be writing to create our tests. So these scenarios will talk about what we will want to test, and based on that we will create a test infrastructure which best suits the need that we are trying to solve, right? So we will look at the list of scenarios also at the end. Now in this class there wouldn't be any coding part, right? This is just an introduction, so it will be mostly theoretical, but a clear understanding of this class is necessary so that you understand what's happening in the coming classes. Now let me quickly move on to the framework definition. So what is a framework? The very first thing that you have to understand is what is a framework. If you don't understand a framework, we can't create it, right? So basically there is a lot of definitions around. There are a lot of definitions of framework around on the internet. You can pick any one and you can remember that, but basically all those definitions vary based on the type of task that a framework is doing. But in a very broad terms, or in a very general term, we can say that framework is a supporting structure to achieve a particular task. Now, by supporting structure, what we mean? We mean that it's a development environment. It is a set of APIs and utility functions and different configuration files and different protocols to write your tests. They combined as a whole creates your framework. So if I'll just quickly read through what's written in the slide, it says that in software engineering it translates uh, to the set of APIs, utilities, development environment, and set of rules that helps achieve a particular task in full efficiency. Now, in our case, the task is to run our tests, to categorize our tests, to report the output of test runs. Now, these are the broad level of tasks that we want to combine together and create a framework around those tasks so that they can be done efficiently, right? So you would design a framework to run your tests again and again efficiently on different machines, right? You would design a framework so that it has the capability to run the tests and then report the tests, right? So these combined as a unit becomes a framework. Now let us see. Well, I think I have framework definition twice. Okay, so we have framework definition 3 times. Well, yeah, this is the second slide. In terms of test, it translates to an infrastructure which can categorize, run, and report your tests, right? So this is what we need from a framework. At the same time, this infrastructure gives you a set of utilities and APIs that can be used to quickly develop your tests, right? And many people can use your framework to develop tests quickly. So basically, it's a unit that can help you categorize, run, and report your tests, and at the same time it can give you certain sets of utility functions and APIs to do your work faster, right? We will understand these as we start coding, but at this point in time it's just theoretical part. After that, let us talk about what are the different components of a framework. So we won't go into a full-fledged high-end framework, because to explain that it would be very hard to explain that in the form of videos. It would be very hard for you to understand in the form of videos, and that topic is very complex to be condensed into a set of few classes. You will create very complex frameworks as your experience grows in this field. So we will design a very basic framework. Let us see what are the components of a very basic framework that will just do our job. So the first component to a framework would be your test runner. Now, what is a test runner? Test runner is a component which knows how to pull your tests out and which knows how to execute them, right? This is a test runner. As the name suggests, it runs your test. Then after the test runner, there is a component called DataProvider. Now, when you start your framework, you would have to know on which environment I have to run my tests, on what browsers I want to run my tests, and what are the different timeouts that I want to use. Where are the different mandatory files, for example, the IE server or the Chrome server, where are those files, those executables, so that I can run my tests, right? So all that information, which tells the framework more about what to do, can be provided to using a component called DataProvider. Now, DataProvider also provides the test data for your tests, right? So basically, a DataProvider can be divided into 2 parts. One gives you the test data, and the other part will give you the run configuration, the basic set of information to start your tests, right? After that, we have the reporter utility. Not exactly utility, it's a reporter module, a reporter component which will give you a set of methods, set of APIs, set of classes to report the test, whatever is happening inside the test efficiently. Now here you can use any off-the-shelf reporter available in Java. For example, you can use a log4j API, but here we won't use a log4j API, because if I start using a log4j API, you won't get most of the details of what's happening around. So I will try it in such a way that you have to write your logger APIs, you have to write your reporter utilities, right? That way you will get a clear understanding of what is happening. Now after that, we can also have a component called utilities. Now utilities is basically it means that you have a common set of functions, common set of classes, which help you achieve some task which is used by multiple tests. For example, if I say that you are into your project requires that you move your window, the browser window, to a particular coordinate before starting your tests. In that case, you would create one function to move the window to a certain point, and you will use that function from across the tests, right, from different tests. Now, as it is a common function which is being used by different tests, you would try to make it inside a utility group, a utility package, right? That is what a utility component will be. So it will contain all the common methods and classes and infrastructure which will be used across by different tests, and it will be used again and again. So that will form your utilities module. After that, the last module, which depends on what kind of framework you are building, could be the page objects. As we are trying to build a Selenium framework, Selenium WebDriver framework, and we know that we would be working on some web page. In that case, we would want to categorize our web pages in terms of page object model, right? So we want that our pages can be represented as page object model so that they can be used efficiently across different tests. So you may have a page object model also in your framework. So these are primarily the basic components of a framework: a test runner, a data provider, reporter, utilities, and page objects if you desire to have it. Now after that, let me show you a basic framework design. Now it's all boxes right now, so you can interpret it in different ways, but the very first thing that is the test runner. Let me go back. This forms the basis of your test framework. This is the component, the test runner component. This is the component which contains the brain of your framework. This component knows how to pull the data from the run data provider, which we can call as the framework configuration provider. It knows how to pick test data. Sorry, not the test data. It knows how to pick tests. So here are all your tests. So test runner would have a link with the run configuration provider or run data provider and the tests. So based on the run data, it will create an instance of all the tests that it want to execute, and then it will start executing every test. Now every test, most of your tests would require some form of data. They will contact your test data provider to get all the data, right? And as the tests progress, they have to log information also. So they will call your logger component and they will log the information. Once the tests are finished, once all the tests are finished, your reporter component will kick in and it will start collating the run data from the logger, and it will create a consolidated report, and it will send it across to your team, to yourself, or whatever your requirements are. So this is basically the 4 or 5, basically 6 layers inside your framework. So the way I have designed these classes is in such a way that we will talk about each component individually, right? In every class we will talk about each component and we will write code to make that component, right? So we will start with the data provider, which will include the run data provider and the test data provider. We will first start with how we can design a run data provider, that means the test run configuration provider, and then we will talk about how we can design a test data provider. Now the test runner is basically nothing more than the TestNG, the existing TestNG framework that we are using. So I hope you have gone through my previous classes on TestNG. Now TestNG does all your running and running part and throwing events during the run. So we can actually use TestNG to create our test runner, and based on the protocol used by TestNG, we can collate our tests and categorize our tests, right? So it will offload a lot of coding effort from our side, which would have been required to code the test runner. So with this understanding, let us move on to the next topic, which is the test runner component. Now the test runner is the component which is responsible for running and categorizing your tests based on the run request. So I know that at this point in time, most of us won't be very familiar with what a framework is. So I will try to be as clear in what I'm saying as much as possible, but at times if you feel that you're not able to understand it, try to go through the tutorial again, and then in the coming classes when you will code, you will understand what is happening, right? So basically if you have run a framework in your project at office, you would have seen that before running the test, you tell the framework what kind of tests you want to run. So you tell the framework that I want to run all my P1 tests, right? You tell the framework that I want to run all my sanity tests or your integration tests or your whatever tests that you have, right? So the test runner knows where the tests are. The first thing it knows is that where the tests are. The second thing it knows is that how the tests are categorized, so that it can pick the right tests. It can pick only the P1, it can pick only the P2, or it can pick only the integration, and whatever way you have categorized your tests, right? So this is what a test runner component does. Now let us move on to the next component, which is the run data provider. We have talked about the run data provider. It is responsible to give you information related to your test run. For example, on how many browsers that you want to run your tests on, the different timeouts that you want to put on your browser, the environment details. For example, run these tests on test environment 2, or probably the database information, the login information of a database, and similar information which is required by the framework in order to start your tests, right? So this is what run data provider component is. Then the test data provider component. Now run data and test, let us talk about it later on, but I just wanted to say that run data or test data can be put inside any kind of format, right? They can be XML file or a simple binary file or even an Excel file, right? They could be in any format. So we'll talk about how we can design our test data or run data providers in such a way that they become agnostic of where the files are stored and in which format the files are stored. So quickly, let's take a look at test data provider component. Test data provider is the component that will deliver data to your tests. Now your tests may require a lot of data. For example, they may require the product to search for. They may require the expected results of a test. For example, they may require that a product should have this description. So that information, the expected name, could come from a test data file, right? So your test data provider is responsible for reading that file, retrieving the data, and giving to the test, right? So this is the test data provider component. Now we have a logger component. We have talked about it earlier. Logger component will help us log information. The reporter component, it will be responsible for collating all the test results at the end and sending across a test report. It could be HTML, it could be an Excel report, or it could be anything based on your needs. Now let us quickly take a look at the project overview, what we will be trying to do. We will try to do, or let me rephrase it. Let's take a look at the project that we will try to automate, and on which on the tests of this project we will try to create a framework around it, so that we can run all the tests accordingly based on our needs. So the project for which we are building the framework will be the demo QA and the store.demoqa website. I will quickly open them up for you. The first one is demoqa.com. And then the second one is store.demoqa.com. This is the very first website, and in this website we will just restrict ourselves to a registration form. We will try to write tests around the registration form, right? So in this website there would be only one functionality that we would try to cover, that is the registration component, right? And on the online store we would try to cover the login functionality, and after that we would try to cover a search functionality where we search for a product like this here, and then the buy purchasing functionality where we can add something to the cart, and then we can actually look for the cart to verify that the correct product is added to the cart, right? So these are the couple of functionalities that we will try to automate in our tests component, and then we will create a framework around those to run these tests efficiently. Now this was about the website, and from what we discussed, we can broadly categorize the tests into registration, login, search, and buy functionalities, right? So scenario overview in each functionality. In the registration, we will just cover register a new user, verify registration process using invalid details. And in the login functionality, we will just cover we'll just write tests for login using a valid username and login using an invalid username and password. Now there could be lots more scenarios in these functionalities. For example, login can have far more number of scenarios, but for the demonstration of a framework, we don't have to go into too much details of different scenarios of a particular functionality, because framework is not tightly coupled with what type of scenarios you are running. It is loosely coupled to that. So what I mean by that is that the basics of a framework will not change too much as the kind of tests changes. So it's not directly related, not exactly directly, it's not tightly related to it. So that's why we can have very less number of scenarios, and we can still understand the concepts of framework. Alright, so in this scenario, in the login scenario, we will just cover the logging with a valid username and login with invalid username and password. After that, we will move on to scenarios in the search area, where we would try to search for a valid product, search for an invalid product, and just verify a couple of things here and there. So after this, we will move on to the buy section. In the buy section, we will try to add a product to a cart, add multiple products to the cart, and then verify whether the products are properly added or not. And after that, yep, that's pretty much it. So this is what we will be doing in the frameworks. So in the frameworks part and frameworks topics, and based on this, the whole understanding of framework will happen. So I know that it doesn't contain a lot of information related to any coding part yet, but I would want you to go through the design and everything. This is a very basic design. It's not a high-end design, and I don't want to make a high-end design to complicate stuff right now. So a small understanding of it, and when we will code, we'll get a better understanding of how things are happening. Right. So with this understanding, I will close this class, and I will see you in the next class.